Hello, universe, blessed be. Welcome to today's workshop, The Astrology of the Salem Witch Trials and the Life of Rebecca Towne Nurse, with a focus on the Mutable Cross. I am Nikki Lucifera. I am the daughter of Wendy. I am the granddaughter of Helen and Nora Lee, and I am the mother of Alana and Tatum. I descend from Slavic, Swedish, and French Canadian ancestry, and currently I live on Akamal O'odham land in Phoenix, Arizona. I am a student of evolutionary astrology as taught by Maurice Fernandez and Jeffrey Wolf Green, and I am a student of permaculture and earth-based practices as taught by Starhawk and the Earth Activist Training Organization. In today's workshop, I'll be focusing on three main points. The first point is Colonial Massachusetts and the Puritan life. I want to paint the background of what life was like during these early days of colonial Massachusetts and the Puritans, so we can really understand how stressful it was, okay? And then the second point will be the life and execution of Rebecca Towne Nurse, an elderly Puritan woman who was executed as a witch. I want to take a moment here and just pause and honor this woman and honor her descendants. The reason this whole workshop came to be was that we actually have a community member who is a descendant of Rebecca Towne Nurse. And in our community, we do some ancestry weaving where we share our roots and our lineage so that we can better understand the totality of who we are. And so through that platform, I discovered that a sister in our community was a descendant of Rebecca Towne Nurse, and I asked her permission to study her astrology, and here we are now. And then the third point will be the astrology of past and present, the mutable cross. So talking about the zodiac signs of Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces, and how a strong mutable cross is seen a lot when there is satanic illusions, hysteria, deception, and misinformation, all which has been coming up throughout 2020 and into this year. Before we get started on today's workshop, I do want to share that I am a professional astrologer. So if you feel inspired by my teaching and the approach that I take to astrology and history, please reach out to schedule an astrology reading. You can reach me directly at thevenusteachings@gmail.com, or we can connect on Instagram or Facebook at Nikki Lucifera. Or check out our matrilineal community at the Uprising PHX on Instagram. My daughter and I co-organize community together, and we focus on astrology, ancestry, and permaculture. And so we'll get started by looking at colonial Massachusetts. So Massachusetts was first explored in 1498 by John Cabot, and then there were many others to follow. It was not officially established as a colony until 1630. It was the third colony, and it is considered a New England colony. New York and Virginia, I believe, came before Massachusetts. Massachusetts was founded by John Winthrop and other Puritans. And when John Winthrop arrived in Massachusetts, he actually arrived with 700 other Puritans with him. So a very big group arriving there in Massachusetts to establish this colony. And so we cannot look at Massachusetts without actually taking a look at colonialism and what our nation is built upon. So what is settler colonialism? This definition is from the website tolerance.org, and I have a whole list of my references on the very last slide of this workshop. So to quote here, the goal of settler colonialism is the removal and erasure of indigenous peoples in order to take the land for use by settlers in perpetuity. And I have another definition here from a different workshop I taught back a while ago, so I don't have the reference for this one, but I like this definition as well. So colonialism is the desire of wealthy nations to control other nations' values and perceptions through cultural means, such as media, language, education, and religion, for their own economic gain. And that's what happened in Massachusetts. So settler colonialism in Massachusetts, when these people started to explore Massachusetts, the colonizers. There were over 30,000 natives living in Massachusetts. 90% were killed during early European colonialism during the 17th century. They were killed through warfare, disease, and epidemics. So the natives' immune system, they were not used to the diseases that the English brought over. So many of them died through disease. And then there were a lot of wars. So this wasn't super peaceful, okay? There were actual massacres that the Puritans did to the native people. So there is a really well-known massacre of the Pequot people. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but you can research it for yourself. And again, I have the references on the last slide, so you can check that out. But during these massacres, the English would actually wipe out entire villages. So they would kill the women, the children, the men, everything. And this was unheard of to the native people. That's not how they waged war amongst, the native tribes. They did it differently. There was much less casualties when they were having war amongst themselves, as far as I understand it. And they certainly weren't killing women and children outright just to dominate the land. So in Massachusetts, the native tribes belong to the Algonquin language group. I apologize for my pronunciation with that word. Some known tribes in the area that spoke that language were the Wampanoag. Again, I apologize for my pronunciation. I'm doing my best to present this material. The Pequot, the Nipmuc, and the Massachusetts. So Massachusetts is actually an Algonquin word. It means, I believe it means upon a great hill. And so that word was actually appropriated from the native tribes and then used to name that area. The native people back then, they lived in small bands and they had no supreme chief. I want to look at my notes a little bit here and make sure I'm not missing anything else I wanted to cover on this slide. Yeah, so the first ever book that was printed on this land on American soil was the Bible. And that Bible was printed by the Puritans in this language, Algonquin, in order to convert the natives to Christianity. So the Puritans created towns called praying Indian towns, where they were trying to convert the native people to their views, values, religion, and culture. So in these praying Indian towns, the native people would be encouraged to abandon their language, to abandon their tribal beliefs, to sever ties with any tribal relatives that were failing to be saved by the Puritans. So it's important that we recognize that I believe that the Puritans actually believed so much in their religion that they thought that they were actually saving the natives by forcing them to convert to Christianity. And this happened all over the world during, colonialism, especially in Africa as well. So back to America though. So the natives, they have these praying Indian villages where they would try to convert the natives to their English ways, including the language, their hairstyles, and how they dressed. The Puritans left England because they were seeking religious freedom. They believed that the Church of England had become corrupt. They did not consider themselves separatists like the Pilgrims did. So the Puritans are actually a different religious organization than the Pilgrims. The Pilgrims considered themselves separatists, and they were leaving the Church of England. The Puritans wanted to reform the Church of England. And so they left England seeking religious freedom and religious and moral reform. But once in America, they did not tolerate any other religions other than their own. So kind of hypocritical. Um, Okay, moving on to the next slide. This is a lot of information to cover in one workshop, so I am doing my best, like I mentioned, to present the material. Okay, so let's get a little bit bigger of a picture of what it was like in colonial Massachusetts. So geography, land, weather, and food. Massachusetts is very mountainy. There's lots of trees and rivers, and the soil is very, very rocky. So it wasn't ideal. The English were not used to farming in such rocky soil when they arrived here. There are mild, short summers, and the winters were very cold and long. So being a Puritan, it was very, very stressful, and it was very, very difficult and intense. The natives in the area were very efficient farmers. They were cultivating squash, pumpkins, and beans all in the same field. So this is permaculture, growing your food with biodiversity. And this actually baffled the Europeans, who grew each crop in separate fields. So that's monoculture. They didn't realize that the Native American way of growing food actually provided a balanced diet and replenished the soil rather than depleting the soil. And that's what we see with monoculture. And the type of agriculture that was brought over from the English was that you grow one crop in one field, very, very linear. And that type of monoculture depletes the soil of all of the vital nutrients. And the natives knew this because they strive to live in harmony with nature, with Mama Gaia. They didn't want to take. They wanted to kind of flow and live as one. And then the Puritans, the colonizers, for trade, they would trade fish and whale products, timber, furs, maple syrup, copper, horses, rum, and beer. They farmed corn, pumpkin, rye, and beans, and they would trade with the Native Americans. And I did read that they would actually trade a lot of metal work with the natives, giving them axes and knives and that kind of stuff that maybe they didn't have before colonialism. And just looking at my notes here, so the English immigrants, so the Puritans coming over here to New England, they actually believed that they were traveling to a vast and unpeopled country. So that's a quote from the Pilgrim William Bradford, that it was a vast and unpeopled country. So when the Puritans arrived, they were surprised that the land was actually full of native people. Um, the native people had their own political systems and their own well-developed, distinct cultures. The English, the Puritans, they considered the natives to be inferior because of their primitive ways. And like I mentioned earlier, they tried to save them or convert them to Christianity or to their culture and ideals as far as belief systems go. According to the author of An Indigenous Peoples History of America, which is a book that we're reading in our community book club right now, the author said that during the early colonial times, that there were actually 15 million natives in America. 15 million natives. So this was a very thriving population of indigenous peoples. Today, in current time, there's 3 million Native Americans. So quite a drastic difference. And let's look a little bit more at the Puritan life. So Puritan means to purify, and that was what their whole belief system was about, was to purify, to be purified, to be pure. So purity was highly valued in their perception of what that meant. So the Puritans left England seeking religious freedom, like I already mentioned, but they denied it to other people. They denied religious freedom to other people. Life was extremely stressful for the Puritan people. Weather was unpredictable. They were learning how to grow food in rocky soil. That was new to them. To have fun was considered irreligious. So they didn't have fun, right? Because that wasn't religious. So music was not allowed. Music in the church was not allowed. And there were some other things like erotic poetry was not allowed in their communities. They were only allowed to write religious poetry. I did try to find information about their sexual practices of the Puritans, because I personally feel like sexual psychology is a big part of who we are as humans and understanding ourselves and our complexes and traumas. And I couldn't find that much. What I found was that sex was promoted among married couples only. It was encouraged to build passion and intimacy within marriage. However, there was no oral sex, anal sex allowed, or female masturbation was not allowed either. And so there, again, strict rules, a lot of restraint. And so you can imagine that there was a lot of repression happening within the psychology of the Puritans. And there's a Jeffrey Wolf Green quote that goes something like, "What is natural and repressed will always be distorted when it is expressed. What is natural and repressed will always be distorted when it is expressed." So you cannot repress nature and what is natural to you, to humans. It'll find a way to bubble to the surface and be expressed. So repressing sexuality, and other things could lead to distortions. And we can see this when we look at, Catholic priests and the sexual abuse that has been prevalent there. Repression leads to distortion. There's also the rape culture and a bunch of other stuff around sexuality, but you can apply that to anything that is natural and repressed will always be distorted by the time it is expressed. So long story short, sex was only allowed if you were married, okay? Otherwise, you would be shamed and there would be all kinds of other ramifications that would happen. These were the times of the Scarlet Letter, like that shit is real, okay? And that was happening during the Puritan times. Every Sunday, there were 3-hour-long sermons that warned of evil and how to stay away from evil and how to not be evil, and sustain your purity. So they believed that the devil was real, that the devil was always lurking about, and women were more susceptible because they were considered weaker than men to engaging into some type of covenant with the devil. Usually this had to do with some type of sexual act with the devil. And so the Puritans, overall, they attempted to create an ideal society based on their religion, based on their religious beliefs. And they colonized, so they created an entire colony based on those religious beliefs. It sounds a little bit cultish, I know, but this is what America is actually built upon. So if you look in this upper right-hand corner here, I have some information. Puritans dominated the New England area from 1640 to 1700. Their numbers grew from 17,000 Puritans to 106,000 Puritans. So that's only over a 60-year period. The number from Puritans went from 17,000 Puritans to 106,000 Puritans. They are the most influential society in America's history, and they are the ancestors to over 8 million Americans. So whether you have studied this stuff or been raised Christian, it's part of our collective unconsciousness. It's ingrained in who we are and the decisions we make, as well as our worldview and how we perceive reality. So their values, they valued marital fidelity, hard work, and restraint. So lots of repression, lots of limitations. Children received a Bible-based religious education. They had a very tight-knit community. They depended on each other for both survival and salvation. Let me get to the next slide here. Okay, so continuing on the same theme, the Puritan life, and to purify in early colonial Massachusetts, religious exclusivity. So if you were opposed to the Puritan religion, you were asked to leave. You were outcasted, you were exiled or excommunicated from the church. They sought to purify themselves. Purification, perfection, this is huge when it comes to the Virgo Pisces axis in astrology. They sought moral and religious reform. They desired to create a perfect society, and church elders were also their political leaders. So there was no separation between doing wrong by God's eyes or their God's eyes and doing wrong socially. It was one and the same. So the judgment was unfathomable that you would experience. And then you would need to repent and atone. So lots and lots of man-made guilt. And again, we see that those that have strong Pisces Virgo axes in their chart have a lot of man-made guilt that they are trying to heal this lifetime. They believed very much so that the devil was real. This wasn't something that was made up. This was actually something that was lurking about, and women were susceptible to these devilish ways because women were considered weaker and more vulnerable. There was also a very strict dress code. There was no silk or velvet or gold thread. This was to avoid greed, pride, and envy. And I want to look at my notes here because I know I have additional stuff that I want to cover. Let me see. So when comparing the Puritans to the native peoples, Puritans sought to settle. They wanted to settle on the land and stay there. And the native people were more migratory or mobile. And so they would travel seasonally. So they had less possessions. And to the Puritan, the English, that was looked down upon because possessions, things of monetary value, gave you status. And the native peoples, they did not have that value system. Their goal was, again, to live in oneness and harmony with nature. Puritans were committed to private land ownership and expected the natives to permanently vacate the area upon their arrival, because the Puritans actually believed that God had bestowed the land to them, that it was actually given to them from God. And there were some quotes by certain reverends that had said that this was God's land given to them to establish their colonies. So in the native population, they valued sharing resources rather than hoarding and taking. So the native people, no one starved unless everyone starved. Okay, so it was all about the community and equality and resource sharing. Okay, so let's talk about the life and execution of Rebecca Towne Nurse. So again, this is an ancestor of our community member. So I am going to do my best to reflect what I have learned about this soul, okay, this Puritan woman. So remember, life was not easy for Puritans, and especially not Puritan women, because women were susceptible to the ways of the devil. So Rebecca Towne Nurse was born on February 21st, 1621. She is the daughter of William and Joanna Towne. She was born in Great Yarmouth, England. She had 3 sisters, Mary, Sarah, and Susan. Susan died at 3 years old. So Rebecca was 9 when her baby sister died. Rebecca was actually the oldest of all of her siblings. Her other sisters, Mary and Sarah, were actually arrested during the Salem witch trials as well for defending her. Mary, I believe it was Mary who survived and the charges got dropped, but Sarah was executed as a witch as well. Rebecca had 3 brothers, Edmund, Jacob, and Joseph. They immigrated as a family to Massachusetts between 1638 and 1639. I couldn't find an exact date. After being in Massachusetts for a few years, Rebecca met and married Francis in 1644. He happened to also be from Great Yarmouth, England. Together, they had 8 children, 4 daughters. So you can see that they would have a lot of descendants. So the Puritans had really big families because it increased your odds of surviving. Okay, remember the winters were really long and freezing cold, and the summers were short. They struggled growing their food. There was a lot that they had to go through in order to actually make it. And so by marrying somebody, especially as a woman, because you had no legal right to own property on your own, so by marrying, it increased your odds of survival. By having children, it increased your odds of survival because your children can now work the farm. Your children can now help and aid in the survival of you and your family. So again, they had 8 children together, 4 daughters. The oldest daughter was also named Rebecca, born in 1647. They had Elizabeth in 1655, Mary in 1657, and Sarah in 1662. And then they had 4 sons, John, born in 1645, Samuel in 1649, Francis in 1660, and Benjamin in 1665. Now, Francis, Rebecca's husband, was an artisan. So he would make trays. He was a tray maker, and he would make other household goods. So household goods were rare to come by during the colonial times. So this no doubt gave them some type of status or wealth to have to have for Francis to have this trade and skill. In 1672, Francis served as a constable in Salem. So when I looked up what constable meant, it was some type of law enforcement figure. So the Nurse family, Rebecca Towne Nurse's family, they were really well known in their community. They were very pious. They went to church every Sunday. They were doing all of the Puritan stuff, okay? In 1678, the family acquired a 300-acre parcel of land in Salem Village. So there was Salem Town, which was kind of like the city, and then Salem Village was the more rural area, kind of a little bit separate from the town. And they acquired that land on a rent-to-own type of contract. Now, there's some disputes or controversy about the land ownership that they had with some other people within the town. So there were some rivalries between community members and land ownership. There was a lot of arguments happening at this time. So, just imagine you are a Puritan, you're new in this land, you're figuring it out. There's all of this, potential violence with the native peoples and this domination that's occurring, trying to convert them to your ways. And you're just like in big time survival mode. So obviously that would create very tense dynamics within the town, within the communities. So during all of this, tenseness, this tension, the Salem witch trials occur. And there were some people saying that they believed that all of the fighting within the community was because the devil was afoot, causing all of these problems. But really, I believe it was probably repression of their natural ways and the repression that they were doing to the native people that was just really bad energy and made them probably go a little bit crazy and delirious and hysterical. Not to mention the astrology and the activation of the Mutable Cross that was occurring at the same time, just like it's occurring for us right now in modern times. So the Salem witch trials, I'm going to give you a little bit of the story, but I do invite you to study it on your own because I'm not an expert on this material. I've just studied it and I'm doing my best to present it to you and correlate the events to astrology and what we're facing collectively currently. So basically, there were these teenage girls in Salem and they started having some delirium, some delusional episodes, acting really weird, like they were like possessed by the devil. And these teenage girls started making accusations towards women in their community that had done this. I don't even know how to explain it. Basically, they believed the spirit of these women were kind of attacking them in the unseen world because these women had entered into some kind of covenant with the devil. And so the accusations from these teenage girls begin on February 29th, 1692. So remember what I said about what is repressed, what is natural and repressed will eventually be distorted when it's expressed. So imagine being a Puritan teenager. And we know how hard it is to be a teenager in general, right? You're starting your moon cycle, you're starting your puberty and feeling sexual, and all of this growth and magic is happening within your body. But sex was only for married people, and definitely their masturbation wasn't allowed. And they were just totally limited. And so these teenage girls start having these episodes, accusing these women of attacking them in the unseen realm. And so the first of the accusations began on February 29th, 1692. Um, so right away we can see that it was Pisces season when the first accusations began. Now, Rebecca Towne Nurse was not accused during the first round of accusations. The first round, there was 3 women that were accused, and Rebecca was not one of them. So even though I'm focusing on Rebecca as one soul during that was hung during the Salem witch trials, there was actually 200 people that were accused of witchcraft and dealings with the devil. So 200 were accused, 19 were executed by hanging, and one was executed by being crushed to death. So this was a form of torture that was done, and it was a man who was crushed to death for witchcraft. And from what I understand, the way that this was done is the person would be laying down and they would put a board on top of you and they would slowly pile big rocks on top of the board until you were crushed and could no longer breathe. Um, so that's really awful and scary that that was done. But you know, the burning times in Europe lasted from about 1300 to about 1600. And the upward number of the women that were tortured and executed during that time is about 9 million women. 9 million European women were tortured and executed as witches, and some really, really bad stuff happened. And I've looked into different ways that they were tortured and executed, just to understand my own um, identity as a witch. So there's a lot of darkness here when it comes to witchcraft and the torture and the execution that was happening in Europe that kind of carried over and resurfaced in Salem during this time. And if you want to learn more about the burning times, you can go to YouTube and search the burning times and look for the documentary that Starhawk made. Starhawk is my permaculture teacher. She's been a practicing witch and an activist going back to like the 60s, the 70s. So you can find a lot of her work, but in specific, you can find the Burning Times documentary on YouTube that she made that talks about the women that were tortured and executed. Anyways, so back to the Salem witch trials. So the accusations began February 29th, 1692. So the astrology on that day, Neptune and the sun were both in Pisces, and they form a T-square to Saturn and Sagittarius, and Uranus, Chiron, and Mars in Gemini. So we'll talk about more about the astrology in a second, but just take note that we are seeing Pisces, Sagittarius, and Gemini in some difficult configuration in the astrology that was taking place then. And then a month later, Rebecca gets arrested. So she's now accused of witchcraft. Now, Rebecca is 71 years old. She has raised 8 children, okay? She actually was pregnant off and on for a good 20 years of her life. And now at 71 years old, she's accused by a teenager for attacking her in the spirit realm, and that she's entered into some kind of a type of covenant with Satan or the devil. My personal opinion is that Rebecca Towne Nurse was not a witch. She was a Puritan woman, doing her best to live the Puritan life of restraint, of moderation, of no fun, limited sexual expression, and also limited creative expression, right? Probably also limited emotional expression, because that's all coinciding. And so she was known, very well known in her community. Her family was very well known. She was known to be extremely pious. So she was following the rules. And this teenage girl, in specific, the teenage girl accusing her was Ann Putman. And this land dispute that Rebecca Towne Nurse's family had was actually with the Putman family. So there's some confusion here, is if that's kind of why Rebecca got pulled into the witch trials, because the majority of the women that were charged or executed for witchcraft usually were either unmarried women, or they did not have sons, brothers, or living fathers. So they had no male counterpart. And so those women were the ones that were kind of considered outcasts. So they were kind of easy targets to be accused of witchcraft. Rebecca is the exception to that norm at the time, because she was a very well-established woman within a well-established family, rather. She had a husband, she had many sons. So when Rebecca was arrested on March 29th, Mercury was now in Pisces, joining Neptune to form a T-square to Saturn in Sagittarius, and Chiron and Uranus in Gemini. Now, after Rebecca's arrest, since she was such a pious, upstanding, elderly woman, all of her neighbors came to support her. They actually created a petition, just like we do now, signing petitions. And I think it was 39 neighbors signed this petition on Rebecca's behalf, saying, she is not a witch. She is a good Christian Puritan woman. And then also many neighbors testified during the trial on Rebecca's behalf, saying, again, she is a pious Puritan woman. She lives the Puritan life. She is not practicing witchcraft. My guess is Rebecca was probably terrified of the devil, right? Terrified of witchcraft, because they were so afraid of evil. You know, evil is lurking around every corner, and women are more susceptible. And that's what their church sermons were about every Sunday, those 3-hour-long church sermons. So again, I don't think that Rebecca was practicing any type of witchcraft. And, you know, witchcraft, I feel, is our most natural way of being. You know, it's very similar to the native principles and practices, that we are one with earth and we live in harmony with earth, and we share resources and we replenish the earth. I don't think that Rebecca was, you know, doing anything that was considered to be witchcraft at the time. Remember, midwifery was actually considered witchcraft as well. And so anyways, after her trial, the jury found her not guilty. And you can see here in this photo, this depiction of the Salem trials. So when the jury came back not guilty, the teenage girls, you know, they created a scene. They started flailing about like they were possessed, retching with this energy of the devil upon them. And so the judge and jury decided to rescind the not guilty verdict and bestow a guilty verdict upon her. There is some different stories that I heard that they tried specifically questioning Rebecca again, and because she was partially deaf, secondary to old age, she was not able to answer the question appropriately, and so they changed the verdict to guilty, and she was sentenced to death, to execution by hanging. And the evidence of this covenant she had with the devil was considered spectral evidence. So it was not something that was able to be seen, right? The judge and jury couldn't see that Rebecca, this elderly woman, was harassing these teenage girls. The teenage girls were just flailing about and creating this spectacle, or this scene, that provided the evidence for the court. And again, that's how they provided the evidence on all of the victims of the Salem witch trial, was through these teenage girls that were having these episodes that caused major hysteria among the community. The community members actually believed that these girls had been possessed by the devil. And oh, I forgot what I was going to say. Anyways, it goes to show how when you get a thought in your mind and you believe that evil is outside of you, how you can just be totally consumed by it because you are so afraid. You are so afraid because you've been conditioned to believe that the devil is real and that there is danger. And so Rebecca was executed on July 12th, 1692. So by that point, Neptune is still in Pisces, just like it is now. And it forms a grand cross opposing Venus and Mars in Virgo, square Uranus and Jupiter, and Chiron in Gemini, and Saturn is still in Sagittarius. So now we have the entire mutable cross activated, which I think just made things worse. I do want to share that Ann Putman eventually apologized for her accusations and the part she played in the execution of all of those people. And she specifically apologized for Rebecca Towne Nurse being executed and her sister being executed. She made a public apology to the church congregation. Ann Putman did, I believe it was in 1701. By that point, Rebecca's husband had already passed away. And she said to the church congregation something along these lines, I wish to lie down in the dust and let God punish me for what I have done. For I now believe that those souls that died were innocent, and it is because of my doing that their lives were taken from them. She said something along those lines to the church congregation, and at that point, the Rebecca Towne Nurse's children forgave her and reconciled with the Putman family. There were other dates and events. So basically, there were 200 people accused of witchcraft. 20 were executed. 5 more died while being held in jail. I don't know if that was secondary to torture and perhaps not having enough food to eat. Another important thing to note was that witches were not allowed to be represented by lawyers or attorneys in court. They had to represent themselves. So because the accusation was of witchcraft, you weren't allowed to have a lawyer. That was the law. Doesn't that sound crazy? So if you were convicted or accused of some other crime, you were allowed to have legal representation. But if you were accused of witchcraft, legal representation was forfeited and you had to represent yourself. So these women that were accused of witchcraft really had no leg to stand on, right? They were kind of on their own before the judge and jury. So I was saying 200 were accused, 20 died from execution, 5 more died while we're in jail. The rest were the other, 150 plus or what have you. Those charges were eventually exonerated and their names were cleared of witchcraft, including Rebecca's name was eventually cleared from witchcraft. However, the last handful of people that were accused of witchcraft, their names were not exonerated until 2001. So we're talking about 20 years ago, there was still a handful of people that were accused of witchcraft during the Salem witch trials that were not exonerated until 2001. So that's crazy. Another thing I want to mention about Rebecca Towne Nurse was after the hanging, just like all of the other witches, they were buried in a shallow grave next to Gallows Hill. That's where they did the hangings, on Gallows Hill. She was buried in a shallow grave. According to legend, her children dug up her body and buried it on their land, their 300 acres. Her grave has never been found to this day, but there is a memorial there, and Rebecca's land and homestead has been turned into a museum. So you can go to Salem and you can see her homestead. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to say about the witch trials, and I think that's it. Again, I'm covering an enormous topic that could be a whole series of workshops, and I'm trying to condense it into one experience today. So let's talk about the Mutable Cross now. So the Mutable Cross consists of Gemini, Mercury, and the third house, Virgo, Mercury, and the sixth house. So Mercury has dual rulership over Gemini, yang energy and externalized energy, Virgo, and internalized energy, a yin energy. And then we have Sagittarius, Jupiter, and the ninth house, and then Pisces, Neptune, and the 12th house. So you'll want to check your chart. So you can pull your chart for free at astro.com. You can reach out to me if you have questions about that. I do have a short little demo video showing you how to pull your chart and how to use the house system that I used. I use Porphyry, or you can just figure it out on your own, free charts at astro.com. And look at these houses and signs and planets. So Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces, Mercury, Jupiter, Neptune, and the third house, sixth house, ninth house, and 12th house. Do you have planets there in those specific houses and signs? Are there hard angles between those planets? And let's look at it a little bit closer. So here I have a quote by Dark Pixie Astrology. She actually has a really good website that I've been researching stuff on it for years. And she was actually one of the only people that I could find that had done some research on the Salem witch trials astrology and had realized how active the Mutable Cross was at the time. So she says here, the mutable signs are the most susceptible to suggestion, the easiest to convince things that may not actually be there, the easiest to convince of things that may not actually be there. So again, if you have a strong mutable cross, you will be more susceptible to illusions and believing something is real when it may not be real. So let's go through these signs. So the Mutable Cross, Gemini. Gemini is how you learn. It's what you study, what you teach and share. It's information. It's taking in information and sharing information. It's labels, titles, names. And those labels and titles and names that you apply to things is how you actually navigate your environment, how you navigate your reality. So it's opinions. It's what you believe, okay? And so with Gemini, you know, Gemini is two, there's two sides to the Gemini, right? It's the twins. And so there's duplicity here. So it's kind of like saying one thing and doing another. Gemini is known for kind of being a flip-flopper or not knowing, you know, which side you're going to get. So Gemini is associated with media, gossip, can be lies or withholding information or misinformation. And it can be kind of more on the surface rather than deep. It's an air sign. So again, it's how you learn, it's how you process information, how you research, how you share information, labels, names, and titles, how you navigate your reality. And there's two sides to Gemini, so duplicity. And then we have Virgo. So if Gemini is about taking in all of this information and being stimulated, constantly learning and wanting to know about everything. Virgo, also ruled by Mercury, is now about discernment. Okay, what information do I want to master? And so Virgo is actually pretty focused on perfection and refinement and purity. They're learning about humility by having to go through experiences of humiliation. So there's this humbleness of Virgo. Virgo is the priestess archetype. So it's about being of service to spirit. Being of service in the flesh, on the earth, realizing that you are actually kind of small in the grand scheme of creation, this vastness, this totality of creation. Virgo realizes I'm small, but I'm going to do my part on earth. I'm going to weave my thread of service into humanity. And so it's the priestess archetype. It's associated, with grain. And so it is about being in the flesh. It's about being practical and being in the time-space reality, the time-space dimension. Then we have Sagittarius. Sagittarius rules natural law, universal law, higher consciousness, higher awareness. They see the bigger picture. It's all about truth and philosophy and preaching and in shadow, this can be, dogma or man-made religions, dishonesty, righteousness. Sagittarius, there's always this kind of speculation that happens with Sagittarius because of their beliefs, right? So they believe something is real, and then there's this conviction behind it. So arguing about religion or arguing with a Sagittarius is kind of hard because they have these beliefs that are real to them, and there is tremendous conviction behind it. So that's why it's really hard to argue about religious or political beliefs with people, because in Sagittarius, that's how they experience the universe, universal law, philosophy, etc. In its highest expression, Sagittarius is not man-made religion, but it is natural law and what you can see and experience while out in nature. So you have a mystical experience out in nature. That's Sagittarius. You download your own truth because you pressed your third eye against a tree and something came through to you. That's Sagittarius. It's natural law rather than man-made law, from my perspective. And then we have Pisces finishing off the grand Mutable Cross here. So Pisces is the alpha and the omega. So it's all of creation. It's the very last sign of the zodiac. So basically every single archetype is held within the Pisces archetype. So the Pisces is everything, the totality of creation, which means good and evil falls under the Pisces archetype, right? Because it's everything. So we have happiness here, but we also have pain and suffering here. Pisces is also this innocence and the loss of innocence, because Pisces, since it is the totality of creation, it's oneness, it's utopia, it's where we all existed before incarnating here in the flesh. And so this innocence that the Pisces has is often lost through some type of experience of perceived victimization. And we have to also note that Christianity, Jesus and the fish, was actually birthed through the age of Pisces. So the astrological ages are about 2100-year cycles, and every astrological age brings in a new culture, a new religion, new gods, new deities, new art, political systems, governments, etc. I have studied the ages to some degree, and I have taught them as well, going all the way back to the age of Cancer, which I believe was around 8,000 BC. And you can see, there is an overlapping of the ages. So it's hard to tell, when one age ends and one age begins, just like it's hard to tell when you're out at sea where one wave ends and one wave begins. So we're not talking in linear time here. We're talking in circular time. And so by studying the ages throughout history, we can see that every age brings new religions, new art, culture, political systems, etc. And we are birthing the Aquarian age now. And so we are actually seeing that happen before our eyes. So the Piscean age is kind of being purged out, maybe healed, maybe there's some resolutions coming through. And we're seeing the archetypes of that age really rise to the surface. So the archetypes of the Piscean age, if we look at Christianity as being this main worldwide kind of religion that spread through colonialism, that it was all about the savior and the devil being outside of self. Okay. And that humans were actually separate from God, and therefore kind of less than God. And usually God is considered male. So there's an absent goddess here. And in my permaculture school last night, I'm in permaculture school currently. I'm taking it for a second time, but Starhawk said this amazing quote by Mary Daly, and it was, "When God is male, male is God." And so I'll say that one more time. When God is male, male is God, which means women can never be equal in a society where there is an absent goddess. The goddess was demonized, the feminine was demonized, the earth was demonized, the native people that lived with oneness with the earth were demonized. And that all happened during the Piscean age. And we can see that really surfacing right now with the Q phenomenon, this hysteria about Satan and baby eating and, all of that stuff. And I'm not saying that, human trafficking isn't a real epidemic in our world. I've been in service to survivors of trafficking for a few years. My women's circle has sponsored local survivors in Phoenix, Arizona. We have sponsored them and provided them with everything they needed to get a fresh start. So I've been doing this work for a few years as far as trafficking goes. So I'm not saying that that's not real. I'm not saying pedophilia is not real. But what I'm saying is that these illusions about Satan and all of that can cause hysteria, mass hysteria that leads to massive cultural and religious wounding. And it's all part of who we are within our consciousness, whether we're aware of it or not. We all have these religious complexes that we're trying to heal. And this also has to do with the projection of good and evil outside of self. And everything that is outside of self is actually also inside of self. And so there's a lot of healing that needs to be done within the Pisces archetype, I believe, to bridge the Piscean age to the Aquarian age. And this has to start by us no longer projecting good and evil outside of self. We can no longer project divinity to a man at the pulpit, to a guru up on a guru stage. We are the divine. The more and more you project upon other people, the more and more you will be denied the divine within. You won't be able to find it. And you will have put somebody else on a pedestal that will eventually fall from the pedestal, because nobody is perfect. Nobody is totally pure, by these religious standards, when we're in human form. That's just the way it goes. And so we have to be our own god and goddess, our own queen and king within. We can't look to other people, because when we project divinity upon other humans, we not only are denying ourselves, claiming our own divinity, but we are then leading to potential God complexes for those teachers, gurus, preachers, whatever it may be that you're projecting divinity on. They may actually, believe that projection. They will introject it and develop a God complex. And then that's when they start to abuse their power, and they start influencing in ways that no longer serves the greater good of all, but actually serves themselves. It serves their own personal gain, which is colonialism as well. Anyways, a little bit of a verbal purge there. Sorry about that. Okay, so Pisces, once again, it's all of creation. It's the innocence and the loss of innocence. It's victim and savior. It's good and evil. It's the veil. It's understanding the veil, and that for something to be revealed to you, it has to be hidden first. It's deception and illusions, because when we're in human form, we can't see the totality of the universe, right? We can do our best to understand it, but because Pisces is the totality of all there is, it is unknowable. It is unknowable. So we have to trust the veil. We have to trust the flow. We have to have faith. So in shadow, Pisces is blind faith. It's blind trust, no boundaries, no discernment. Moving on to the next slide. And I would happily take any questions if you want to comment on YouTube or on my social media platforms. I would love to dialogue about this topic. So what is the Mutable Cross continued here? This is from Maurice Fernandez's Neptune book. And I'll just kind of read it off and then free flow a little bit. So Pisces is the totality of creation. Therefore, it is unknowable. Gemini is the ego's effort to make the unknown known by observing and learning. Okay, so if Pisces is the alpha and the omega, the beginning and the end of all that there is, right here, Gemini is the ego's effort to make the unknown known. It wants to know, it wants to understand, and it does this through observing and learning, studying. Virgo is then the ability to control what is known, to make use of what was learned in the Gemini archetype. So we have Gemini, then Virgo next. And then after Virgo, we have Sagittarius. Sagittarius is now the ego's need to go beyond the limits of what is known to understand the bigger picture. Sagittarius wants the bigger picture, the bigger view, the bigger perspective of what the universe is all about, because it gives their life meaning. They can understand their part in the universe by having the bigger picture. And so there's this urge for more that fosters intuition, risk-taking, and speculation. And then closing the cycle out, or the spiral out, with Pisces represents the ego's need to realize its limitation. So if you are in human form, you have an ego, and through Pisces, you realize the ego's limitation when it comes to understanding the immensity of existence. We will never be able to understand it all because we are in human form. We are in the flesh. And so we can do our best to understand the unseen world. And as we learn more about the unseen world, we can try to create cultural norms that benefit all. But if this becomes distorted and it's man-made religion and stuff, you can see how that would get us off path, because nobody really knows. Nobody really knows what takes place in the unseen world. We can only do our best. And continuing on the same thread here, following Maurice's teachings, this book has been incredibly influential in my life, BTW. I've actually gotten 2 readings from Maurice over the last couple of years, and I've read both of his books from front to back. He has another book other than his Neptune book called Astrology and the Evolution of Consciousness. I highly recommend that one as well. Okay, so here he says, what is unknown and beyond control is Pisces. It stands to oppose the need to manage and control Virgo. Squaring the Gemini Sagittarius axis represents the learning process and the desire to transform the unknown into the known. However, no matter how much you learn and study, the unknown to Pisces is infinite, forever putting the ego in a position of learning, humbleness, and trust. Okay, so we go through these periods perhaps of disillusionment, and by realizing something wasn't the way it was, we're actually humbled. The ego gets humbled. We experience some humility, and we learn that we just have to trust the process. We have to trust that whatever is taking place in the unseen world is actually for our own betterment. And if there is evil, then that too would be inside of us, right? We have to just trust the process. We have to ride the waves and go with the flow. That's why it's also really important, if you have a strong Pisces or Neptune in your chart, that you really strengthen the polarity, which would be Virgo, and, learn discernment and discrimination, and realizing things like, if it's too good to be true, then it probably is, kind of thing. And also being sure to check in with yourself if you are ever bestowing blind trust upon somebody, blind faith upon somebody, and just be mindful of those tendencies, because it can lead to victimization and loss of innocence. And once you are victimized, usually you then want to victimize the person that victimized you. And so the victim becomes the victimizer. And so under the Pisces archetype, we have both the savior and the victim. Moving on here to the next slide, looking again at the astrology of the Salem witch trials. So those dates that I mentioned a few slides ago, now we have the charts. And I apologize that they're kind of small, but maybe you can zoom in if you want to see them a little bit more close. So starting with Rebecca's birth chart. Now, just to be clear, I do not have Rebecca's birth time. So we cannot use her rising sign, okay? We do not know for sure if she was a rising sign. And the moon could be in a different place as well, because the moon is the fastest planet in the sky. However, based on my soul's intuition and speculation, I feel like she was a double Pisces sun and moon conjunct Chiron. That just, to me, makes sense for her life story, as well as her execution and persecution, because again, the Pisces archetype does have to do as well with suffering or persecution. Just like Jesus suffered for our sins, Jesus was persecuted and executed on the cross. So if you do have a strong Pisces Virgo axis in your chart, you may be dealing again with, man-made guilt and this need to atone or make right for something, not feeling good enough. That's a big part of your journey this lifetime. Anyway, so Rebecca's astrology, she is Pisces sun, moon, and Chiron. So here we see her Pisces stellium. And it was square Gemini Sagittarius nodes. She was South Node Gemini, North Node Sagittarius. So the mutable cross is activated in a hard angle here, which is called a T square. In evolutionary astrology, when you have planets squaring the nodes, it is considered a skip step from previous lifetimes. Um, and the apex of the T-square is in Pisces. And so you can see this, through her devotion to her religion, through her pious lifestyle. She was really trying to do the Puritan thing, and then she ended up being persecuted. Um, and then when we look at the date of the accusations, so these were not the accusations against Rebecca, but the very first accusations in the Salem witch trials began on February 29th, 1692. So Neptune is at 17 degrees Pisces, conjoining with the sun. The sun is meeting Neptune here, and it forms, again, a T-square to Saturn in Sagittarius. And look at all these planets in Gemini. We have Uranus, Chiron, and Mars in Gemini. So again, and an intense T-square. So we see that there's going to be, illusions, misinformation, people talking, lying perhaps. And maybe they're not lying, or sharing information with malintention. Maybe they think they're doing the right thing. I don't know, but either way, it was happening. They were these girls, these teenage girls. They were, possessed, and they were, telling these stories and making these accusations. So we have remember, Gemini and Sagittarius is the axis of making the unknown knowable. They want to know, they want to understand. And Pisces is what is unknowable. So there's illusions here, disillusionment, false truths, false information, persecution, judgment, all of that stuff happening. Then when we look at Rebecca's arrest that happened 1 month later on March 29th, 1692, Mercury has now conjoined Neptune in Pisces, forming the T-square to Saturn in Sag, as well as the Chiron and Uranus in Gemini. And so Mutable Cross continues to be active, and Rebecca was arrested. Look at Rebecca's chart. Look at where her sun and moon and Chiron were. It's in Pisces. It's kind of a wide orb to where these planets are, but it's still there. And then her south node is at 13 degrees Gemini. Look at where transiting Chiron was, exactly on her south node, 13 degrees. This is major revelation for her. Her greatest wound was manifesting literally. She was being arrested for witchcraft, something this woman probably feared terribly. And I believe when she was arrested, she, some women during the witch hunts, and that they would end up being forced into a confession, and they would be turning in other women for witchcraft, because they were trying to survive. I do believe that's the original sister wound, perhaps, that betrayal that occurred back then. But anyways, Rebecca Towne Nurse, she didn't do that. She didn't turn in anybody else. She didn't confess to try to save her life. She said, I am as innocent as the unborn child. I am as innocent as the unborn child. Because Puritans believed that once you were born, you were burdened with original sin. And so she said, I am as innocent as the unborn child. Which led to her death and her greatest wound. And that wound was probably passed on to her family, her children, her ancestors. And for all we know, you could be an ancestor of Rebecca Towne Nurse. She had 8 children. Okay, moving on now, the last chart here is the actual date of her execution on July 12, 1692. So Neptune in Pisces at the exact degree it is at today, 19 degrees. Pisces is in, or Neptune is in Pisces now. Neptune has a long transit. It's in Pisces now today at 19 degrees, and it was at 19 degrees at the day of her execution. And now, instead of having a T square, the entire mutable cross is activated. So Neptune is in opposition to Venus and Mars in Virgo, squaring now Jupiter is now in Gemini with Uranus, and also squaring Saturn in Sagittarius. So we can see planets in Virgo, planets in Sagittarius, planets in Pisces, planets in Gemini. So that's creating a lot of stuck energy. There's no real escaping it. So it probably obviously made things worse. There was no resolution. There was no saving Rebecca Towne Nurse from being executed. So if we look again at the day of her arrest, Chiron was at 13 degrees exactly on her south node, and now Jupiter is. On the day of her execution, she was expanded out of this world. She left her body. We also see on her execution chart here that the sun conjoined Pluto. That's really intense, can be symbolic, you know, for death or actual death. And also do note that, you know, during her execution, there were other women or people that were accused of witchcraft that were also hung on the same day as well. So again, I'm just zeroing in on one soul that was a victim of the Salem witch trials. But again, there were 20 that were executed and over 200 that were accused. So we can see through these chart examples that the mutable cross, satanic illusions, misinformation, hysteria, you know, good and evil, all was at play during the Salem witch trials. Now let's weave it all together with what we've been going through here in the US as a collective in our country. So starting with the US birth chart, the US birth chart that I'm using is the Sagittarius rising chart. And so it's Sagittarius rising. It has Mars and Gemini, square Neptune and Virgo. So this is, again, a hard angle. We can see the mutable cross is at play here. Sagittarius, Gemini, Virgo, and Neptune is in Virgo. I feel like that's really even reflecting those Puritan values of being perfect, of being purified and going through this need to be good, to be perfect for God, to have this ideal society that's based on religion, religious perspectives and values, how they sought the colonizers. And it's worth noting that our country is actually having its Neptune opposition. So like I mentioned, Neptune currently is at 19 degrees Pisces. I believe it had made it up to 20 or 21 degrees before going retrograde. And it retrograded back to 18 and now it's direct. But so our country is going through a period of massive disillusionment, facing all of the illusions that our country was built upon, that we thought it was built upon, you know, the values of equality and all men are created equal, when actually there's systemic racism and repression of people of color, of the indigenous people. There's all of these wrongs that we haven't made right yet because we have not integrated the past. We have not integrated what our pastime leaders have done. And so we have to be the leaders now, and we have to take a really honest look at our country and its founding and what was done to the people of color. We have to integrate this into our reality so that we can create a better future for all of the generations to come. So that's also a very Virgo Pisces thing, to right the wrongs, to atone for it, and to accept responsibility. I have a fly. Anyways, so that's the US birth chart. Again, we can see that the mutable cross is activated. And then when we go to the very first QAnon post that was posted on 4chan. The date that I found for this was October 28th, 2017. Um, and I know QAnon is quite controversial. For me, I never believed in it because of the devil thing. That's not part of my beliefs and my reality. And I did do a fair amount of studying, and I watched that documentary out of the shadows or something. And the night that I watched that documentary, I was legit terrified. I was so scared of the devil and bad shit. I could not believe that that was my reality, and that I was going to have to live my life now believing that this shit was real. um Luckily, I woke up in the morning and I remembered that I was a witch, and I don't believe in the devil. That's not part of my belief system or my goddess spirituality. Goddess spirituality, goddess religions are based on what you can see with your eyes. They are based on nature and how you relate to nature and how you relate to what you can see with your eyes. So this is earth and sky. That to me is my religion. That is goddess spirituality. And that is what Starhawk teaches, actually. And again, you can see her documentaries online. She's the creator of a goddess religion called Reclaiming. Anyways, so luckily, when I woke up in the morning, I remembered that I was a witch, and I no longer had to be afraid of the devil. And so it fell away from me, and I was anchored in the earth and what I could see with my eyes and feel in my body. So the first QAnon post posted on 4chan, Saturn is in Sagittarius. Now, if you remember right, the first, the chart of the accusations, oops, let me see if I can go back to that previous slide here. Yeah, when we look at the accusations, the arrest and the execution of Rebecca Towne Nurse and basically all of the Salem witch trials, Saturn was in Sagittarius, just like it was at the very first QAnon post, okay? And our country is actually Sagittarius rising. So that's a correlation to me, okay? And then we see Saturn is squaring Chiron and Pisces down here. And so remember, in the previous charts during the witch trials, Chiron was in Gemini. So again, Chiron was in the mutable cross. And Mars is in the early degrees of Libra here. So Mars had just left Virgo after squaring Saturn and entered Libra. So I would imagine that that energy was already in place when whoever made that QAnon post that initiated this hysteria that has played out all the way until now. And then let's look at Donald Trump's chart and see if we can kind of continue on the same theme. So Donald Trump, born on a lunar eclipse in Gemini Sagittarius, just like we've been having this last year. He's a Gemini sun. Uranus is in Gemini. Now, when we go back and we look at the witch trials, where is Uranus? In Gemini, okay? So Uranus is in Gemini. Uranus also rules trauma, the unexpected shock. Uranus in your chart is where you have all of your unconscious memories from trauma from previous lifetimes. He has a Sagittarius moon, Sagittarius south node, plus he has Pluto in the 12th house. So that is a Pisces soul, according to evolutionary astrology. So very, very strong mutable signs in his chart. So you can see that he played a big role in these illusions. You know, God, Savior, whatever was projected upon Donald Trump. And the believers, they really believed it. This is really an intimate subject for me to talk about because there are Trump supporters in my family. And I've been really trying to navigate this reality and understand and listen and also hold them responsible. My daughter keeps messaging, I'm sorry. Anyways, and so you know, the savior was projected upon Donald Trump. We know that is a Pisces thing, to project God or evil outside of self. And I followed the the insurrection. I followed it closely on two different Instagram accounts, well, three Instagram accounts. I always follow the activist Sean King. He's a civil rights activist, huge inspiration to me in my journey. And then I also followed anti-racism accounts called Racist and Unemployed, and also Capital Registry. And so on Racist and Unemployed and the Capital Registry, they were sharing the identities of every single person that was at the Capitol insurrection. And you know, these people, they posted live videos, they were sharing photos, and just really being super open about their, you know, criminal behavior. And watching the videos of these people, they were, from my perspective, my reality, my lens, my ego, they were completely living in a state of illusion and fantasy. They legitimately believed that they were fighting for a cause. They legitimately believe that Donald Trump is the savior. Like, they really believed it, and that what they were doing was just, and they wanted pardons from Donald Trump. So when we look at Pisces and blind faith and blind trust and all of that stuff that can happen through these projection of the divine or God or saviors and evil and everything, we saw it firsthand with the people that did this insurrection on the Capitol. And you can go to those Instagram profiles and you can watch their videos if you want. But literally, I saw it in their eyes. They believed it in their core that they were truly doing what they felt God wanted them to do and what would make the world a better place. And then I did add the George Floyd murder here as well, because I saw some really unfortunate things come through my social media at the time, shortly after George Floyd's murder, saying, oh, that he faked his death and he's really in on this thing with, you know, George Soros and causing chaos and all of that stuff. I just can't. I can't. I can't. That's all I'm going to say is I can't. This is a human. This is a human soul that lost his life secondary to police brutality, and it needs to be respected, and there has to be reform, etc. Anyways, looking at this chart on the day of his death, in Minneapolis, we have Gemini Sun, Gemini Venus retrograde, Gemini Mercury, Gemini North Node, okay? Plus, we have Mars and Neptune in Pisces. Mars is square the sun, okay? Plus the South Node is in Sagittarius. So Gemini Sagittarius nodal axis, that is what Rebecca Towne Nurse was born, the witch that was executed that we've been focusing on. She had those nodes, except they were reversed. She was Sagittarius North Node, Gemini South Node. But again, we're seeing that there could be misinformation, illusions, delusions, etc., all related to the murder of George Floyd, instead of just actually seeing what it is and taking responsibility for the systemic racism that is prevalent in our world. Then we have my favorite character that I've been studying, the Q shaman, who is from Arizona, where I currently live. And, you know, I got his birthday because I immediately found him on Facebook, secondary to a close sister sending me his Facebook. And I went through his entire Facebook and I went through his entire YouTube before it was deleted. So yes, I was a little bit obsessed with understanding this man's psychology. I admit that. And it is what it is, okay? I have a deep need to understand humanity, and that's just what it is. And so the Q shaman, I'm drawing a blank on what his name actually is right now, something Angeli that he goes by. But anyways, you see, he has both Sun and Mercury in Pisces, square his Gemini Sagittarius nodal axis, and he has Uranus in Sagittarius. So in the previous charts, Donald Trump, Uranus in Gemini, The day of the accusations throughout the entire witch trials, Uranus, trauma, was in Gemini. Now for this guy, it's in Sagittarius, but still, the mutable cross is at play. It's very dynamic and activated in all of these charts. So you can see here that, and this man, I will say he is very well studied. His videos on YouTube, I mean, he is very educated. He has studied a lot about spirituality, and he presented it and spoke in a way that was very good. And so this person, the Q shaman, you can see that he has this need to bring the unknown knowable, to understand source, to understand what's in the unseen world, and to bring it down here into the 3D and share it with other people, to teach about it, to share information about it, his videos, his Facebook. But he would be more susceptible to illusions and delusions. And so unfortunately that's what happened to him, and hopefully he's doing okay. I really have no idea, other than him requiring organic food while being held in jail, which is a reflection of white privilege. Women, you know, can't even get supplies for their menstrual cycle when they're in jail. You know, they struggle to have what they need to just have their basic needs met, but then this man is getting organic food, which is just kind of just shows us how our system is not right. Anyways, so the Q shaman has struggles with beliefs and illusions and the knowable and the unknowable. And then we look at today's chart for actually today, which is January 27th, 2021. And we have Neptune at exactly 19 degrees, where it was at the exact day of Rebecca Towne Nurse's execution, which was also the same day of, you know, other people being executed as well. Squaring exactly the Gemini Sagittarius nodes. So the mutable cross is at play. Now we've been under these influences, you know, you can see all the way back to George Floyd's chart. The eclipses are in Gemini and Sagittarius right now. Neptune is in Pisces right now. Coming up this summer, Mercury will retrograde in Gemini. And then in, I think about 4 or 5 years from now, Uranus will move into Gemini. Uranus will leave Taurus and move into Gemini. So this energy is, it's about us for a while. Our country's Neptune opposition. So we all have to be doing the work to practice discernment and discrimination when it comes to information and the knowable, and be responsible to humanity and influencing in what we are sharing. And so let's talk about this, about healing and awareness. So what do we do? What do we do so we don't repeat the Salem witch trials? You know, and that's just one reflection of the many times there has been persecution and demonization of groups of people throughout time. In our current reality with the Q phenomenon, those that are being demonized, you know, as the devil worshippers and the baby eaters and all of that, that's the Democrats and the liberals. You know, it used to be women and the witches, and it used to be the Jewish people, and now it's the Democrats and the liberals. So these, this cultural wounding is embedded into our collective unconscious, and these cycles are repeating themselves. And it's up to us to stop these cycles, to no longer have blind faith, to no longer project the divine, good or evil, outside of self, and to take responsibility within. So disillusionment is the greatest pain. I read that in Jeffrey Wolf Green's book, I believe, his Neptune book, and that's true. I'm a Pisces queen, and I can tell you firsthand, disillusionment is in fact the greatest pain. To believe something is a certain way, and then to wake up and realize that it's in fact not that way, is incredibly painful. It will break your heart. It will destroy you. It hurts so bad to feel that pain. It's like having your your rose lenses on. I always wear my heart glasses. That's totally like a Pisces thing, right? You're seeing the world through the lens of love and oneness, and you know but then you get your rose glasses slapped off your face and you realize that here on earth you lose your innocence. You lose your innocence, and not everything is as it appears. Okay. um, and so I have tons of compassion right now for those people that were at the Capitol, for those people that have really gone all in this Q theory. And I have compassion for you. I understand that type of pain, but it passes. It passes, and you will learn. You will learn so much more from this experience. It'll continue to unravel, and these lessons will help you throughout the rest of your life. And so the loss of innocence here, this last line, this is from Maurice Fernandez. The loss of innocence leads to greater consciousness and humility. And so if you lost your innocence, you will now have more consciousness, which could be Gemini, right? More understanding, that could be Gemini. And so sometimes we have to go through these cycles of disillusionment, and we gain more consciousness about what's real and what's not real, what's knowable and what's not knowable. Um, and ultimately, we also learn humility, that, we are actually kind of small in the grand scheme of things. In the vastness of, creation, the totality of creation, we are kind of small. And so there's this humbleness, this humbling of the ego. And through that process we can actually become priestess, and we can be of service. Even though we may be just one thread, we can weave that thread of service and magic, to be there for, spirit, for for God in the flesh, right? So this is like, when we look at Virgo, the priestess archetype, and the grain, the harvest, we have to be in the time and space reality. We have to realize that we are but just one thread of magic. And by weaving our thread of magic, we play a part in the totality of creation. We do our part in service to the whole, which means we have to be in the time space reality. We have to honor what we can see with our eyes and experience in our bodies. If you are focused only on the unseen realm, which would be Pisces, Sagittarius, that's where the illusions are, okay? Um, Focusing on the unseen realm will lead to overwhelm and anxiety and disillusionment. You got to bring it down to earth. You've got to be in the flesh. You have to be the priestess. You have to tend the garden and be on earth. Okay. Otherwise, it'll lead to overwhelm, anxiety, and disillusionment. So you can't experience the timelessness of Pisces and the unknowable without being in the time space reality, the knowable. So you have to balance that polarity between timelessness and the unseen world, and time and space and the seen world, the visible world. So here I have, focus on earth and what you can see with your eyes. This is why I made it through this whole last year. I feel, without getting caught up in all of this stuff, is because I focused on earth and nature. So nature, earth, and also the sky. So permaculture and astrology, I feel like saved me. It grounded me into my body. And so I didn't get lost in what is unknowable and unvisible. You can't see it. I focused on earth and what I can see. And that will help you. So when we look at the spiritual practices of the native people or of the witches, it was about being on earth and understanding Mama Gaia and how you relate to Mama Gaia, and how you participate in the 3D world. It's not about blasting off in transcendence and leaving this world. It's about being in this world, so much so that you are fully embodied and your senses are fully alive, and you embody spirit in the flesh. And then implement boundaries and discernment. So, be mindful of projecting blind faith and trust upon any teacher, guru, preacher, authority figure, or whatever. Have some boundaries, have some discernment about who you are trusting. Not that you need to be paranoid or anything like that, but just have some boundaries and stay aware. If something is too good to be true, then it probably is. I've started paying attention to what kind of symptoms I might be having during a period of disillusionment, or illusions rather. So if I'm having some kind of fantasy in my psychology take place, and I think it's real, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to act on this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to create this, i I go back to my journal and I look at what are the symptoms that I have been able to recognize when I'm experiencing an illusion or a fantasy that is not real. And if I'm having those symptoms, then I know, wait a second, this may be an illusion. It may not be real in the 3D world. I'm not going to act on it. So for me, when I'm having an illusion, I feel like my eyes almost get kind of cloudy or veiled, and I can't see everything. But I'm also in a state of like excitement and also urgency. I gotta do this thing. I gotta do this thing. It's coming through me right now from Source. Goddess is talking to me, and I gotta do it right now. That sense of urgency, but also not being able to see it clearly in the 3D, cues me in that this may actually be an illusion, and I shouldn't act on it right now. I need to process it a little bit more. I need to bring it down to earth and take my time with it. And I've learned this over time. So, and I'm not perfect. I still have illusions. I still wear my heart glasses, right? But I'm implementing more and more boundaries, discernment, taking time, being in the 3D, focusing on earth and sky. So I don't get lost in fantasy. So I don't get lost in the unseen world. Okay, so I feel like that is my presentation for this workshop. I have no idea how long I've talked for. I hope you enjoy it. I hope it helps you. Please give me feedback. And again, if you want to go deeper into your astrology journey, please reach out. I do astrology readings. That's my number one way of sharing my gifts and passion. So please reach out to me. And also remember, me and my daughter have a matrilineal community that focuses on astrology, ancestry, and permaculture. Um, I am Nikki Lucifera. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook. And here is my list of references. If you want me to send these links to you so that you can actually click on them, just send me a message. I'll be happy to send them to you, and you can go down and do your own research on the witch trials, or on, the Mutable Cross, whatever it is. So may we all be blessed and evolve with ease and grace. Thank you. Bye.